In the meantime, let's bring in, like we promised, more legal analysis and expertise with our friend Neama Rahmani, and he joins us. He's been following this case so closely as well. Neama, good to see you. Thanks for being with us here. So we just went over the litany of actions in this decision by the judge. I mean, no matter how you put it, this is a pretty damning day for not only the former president, his company, his organization, his sons, and former employees. This is quite damning, is it not?
Oh, Andrew, it's absolutely damning, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. I mean, Donald Trump has been found to be a fraudster, as are his two sons. So, you know, even with someone with Trump's net worth, $355 million, or almost that amount, is a lot of money. Of course, Trump will appeal, but unless the Court of Appeals stays or pauses that judgment, he's going to have to pay it. And he's also going to have to pay for an appeals bond to do so. And you know, although the business licenses weren't canceled, which was a win for Trump and a reversal by Judge Engoron, Trump, Eric, and Don Jr. can no longer serve as officers or directors of the company. They can't run it. So they can be shareholders. They can be the passive owners of the company. So any way you slice it, even though this was just a civil case and no one's going to jail, this was a very big hit for Donald Trump and his company.
Yeah, you know, Neama, he does have 30 days to appeal, and we have some pool producers there in New York saying that I believe all of the justices on the New York State Court of Appeals were appointed by either Governor Cuomo or Governor Hochul. And you can make the argument that this is not really a favorable jurisdiction to the former president. Help us make sense of what his appellate recourse looks like.
Well, what I will say is this. Donald Trump will certainly appeal, and he has had some success on appeal in this case. The appellate court dismissed Ivanka from this case. So she got out. So he has won at the appellate level in this case. But I mean, you're right, Andrew. It's going to be very hard because Engoron here was both the judge and the fact finder, the jury in the case. And some of that was because Trump's lawyers didn't ask for a jury to hear the case. And some of it was because of the technical legal issues that the relief sought may be equitable. But, you know, really the question is, you know, is Trump himself to blame? His antics inside and outside of the courtroom really turned off the judge. Obviously, Trump is going to argue on appeal that he was treated unfairly. There's some other arguments as well. He, of course, has consistently said that the banks suffered no harm, even if there was fraud, because there was no default. He made the payments on time. And the state is going to say, well, in a fraud case, it doesn't matter if the victim was harmed, as long as you, the fraudster, benefited. So he does have some arguments. He's going to obviously try to push this out, but I think the chances of a successful appeal in this case, based on the facts and the law and the judges, like you said, is pretty much slim.
Let's go over 2 points that you made there, because this was a key fixture of this trial that I was harping on. No jury. And that was, you can make the argument, somewhat at the fault of the Trump legal team. If this was presented before a jury, do you think we would have seen a different result?
Potentially, yes. We knew that Engoron was no fan of the facts in this case or Donald Trump. I mean, obviously, he sanctioned him for violating the gag order, put him on the stand and cross-examined him. And, of course, he did rule for partial summary judgment before the case even started, saying just on the documents themselves that they were actually fraudulent. Now, the question is, did Trump's lawyers make a mistake? Because if you are a party in the case, you don't automatically get a jury trial. You have to demand it, and they did not check the box. Now, this is a unique New York law, and there's a distinction between law on one hand and equity. So the question is, when the New York Attorney General was asking for money damages, is that a legal case, which you do have a right to a jury, or is it an equitable case, which you do not? I know I'm getting in the legal weeds a little bit here, but the point is, even if Trump's lawyers asked for a jury, there was a possibility that they wouldn't get it, and Engoron would still heal this case. But it was certainly a bad audience for the former president.
All right, and Neama, let's untease this point that the Trump argument has been, you know, these loans were paid back. How can there be fraud when we fulfilled our obligations? Help us make sense of that. I think for viewers and for, you know, opponents and proponents of the former president, that's confusing.
It is. So normally when you think of fraud, you think of someone ripping someone else off and the victim suffering harm. And in this case, the banks were paid. So the Attorney General's argument was, well, yeah, the banks were paid back, but if it were anyone else with significantly less collateral and assets to back up the loans, you would have had to put more money down. You would have had to pay a higher interest rate. So you, by falsely inflating your assets to the tune of billions of dollars, you actually gain $370 million worth of benefit in terms of lower interest payments. And under the law there in New York, as long as there's a benefit to the fraudster, the person who is committing the fraud or conspiring to do so, that's enough for the purposes of there being no loss to the victim.
So, Neama, I'm curious, too, there was this kind of Hail Mary, it seemed like, at the very tail end of the trial once closing arguments were concluded. And Tish James came out and said she was kind of upping the damages ask from $250 million, which was at the outset, to $370 million there at the tail end of the trial. What was the strategy behind that? I mean, did the fraud alleged and now committed warrant that much of an increase in damages? Clearly, the judge there and the Attorney General thought so. What did you think, though, of that right at the last minute?
Well, parties in any civil case, they can change what they're asking for based on the evidence that comes out at trial. And here, obviously, you had all sorts of accountants and experts come in and testify. So just because the pleadings ask for a certain dollar amount of damages, I mean, we see it all the time based on the evidence and the testimony and the documents that come in, that may change. So I think that's what the AG's office will argue on appeal. Well, you know, what came out of trial was different than what was originally presented. And Engoron clearly bought that argument because he gave the Attorney General almost everything that she asked for, $355 million of the $370 million ask.
You know, Neama, there's an element to this as well about Trump not being able to serve as the executive of a business in New York State, as well as his sons for a period of time. Although the court, you know, is saying that this appointed monitor to oversee the Trump organization will remain in place. Barbara Jones, she's a retired federal judge. She was already acting in that capacity before this judgment was rendered today. But there's yet another call in the decision for an independent kind of compliance officer now to be appointed as well. What is the role of these individuals? What are they tasked with doing?
Well, the compliance officer, it's a new position, is going to report to the judge in the case, Judge Jones, like you said. And really their job is to make sure that financial documents are accurate, that these individuals both review them before they're submitted to anyone, banks, insurance companies, and the like. So I think the purpose of this is to make sure that everything that's submitted, it's on the up and up. And, you know, if you do want to take a step back, I mean, the fact that, you know, Trump can still own these entities, he can't operate them at least for 3 years, is still somewhat of a win for the former president, because there was a real possibility that the licenses would be canceled and the monitor would have to step in and actually dissolve these entities, liquidate all the assets, which would have been really bad for Donald Trump.
Yeah, Neama, we're getting more and more reaction in as well from those in Trump's orbit, including his son. I want to put up this tweet here. Donald Trump Jr. responding to this judgment today, saying this: "We've reached the point where your political beliefs combined with what venue your case is heard are the primary determinants of the outcome, not the facts of the case. It's truly sad what's happened to our country, and I hope others see it before it's too late to correct course." We also have this tweet in from Alina Habba, who represented the former president in this case, saying this: "This verdict is a manifest injustice, plain and simple. It is the culmination of a multi-year politically fueled witch hunt that was designed to take down Donald Trump before Letitia James ever stepped foot into the Attorney General's office." So, Neama, we're not naive. You're not naive. You know there's so many political considerations at play with the former president, who is right now the presumptive nominee for Republicans going into November here. And we're going to try our best to stay away from some of these political considerations. But when you have all of this being alleged that there was political interference in this case, James and Justice Engoron kind of running interference, there, for Democrats, that's what former President Trump has said all along, that this is a case of election interference. I mean, is that going to be kind of interpreted once this gets to the appellate level at all, or is this going to be just the political grandstanding that goes on for the duration of this case? Does it have any weight, is what I'm asking?
Well, Andrew, there's law and there's politics. And first, I'll talk about the law. Trump has argued that he's being treated differently. This is selective prosecution. Other folks, do this all the time. But it's really not a legal defense in the case. An example I like to give is, if I'm driving home today and I'm speeding and, I'm cited for speeding, I can't point to all the other individuals who are also speeding and who are not facing a similar consequence. Of course, is the Attorney General going after Trump? Maybe. Now, we got to talk about politics as well. This is New York, and it's a very liberal venue. And you hope that Justice Engoron, who's been a judge for many years, is doing things for the right reasons. But Trump has now suffered 3 significant civil defeats here. The 2 previous ones, of course, being Jean Carroll, the defamation trial part 1 and 2. And, and I know Trump is a fighter and that's what his base likes, but, you have to also look at your audience there, and maybe, just maybe, you should have resolved some of these civil cases instead of getting up there, fighting, and really going down in flames, which is what happened in each of these 3 cases.
Let's talk about these massive judgments. Now 3 Fridays ago, the judge there, Lewis Kaplan, in New York, rendered his verdict, or the jury, I should say, in the defamation suit against Jean Carroll and Trump, to the tune of $83.3 million. You had that 3 Fridays ago. Today, Friday, $350+ million that Trump and the Trump organization will have to pay back to the state of New York. My question to you, Neama, is will any one of these entities see the money from Trump and the Trump organization in these related cases? Do you think so?
I think so. There's a lot of ways you can enforce a judgment. You can garnish wages, and obviously, Trump, maybe if he's president again, he'll be getting some wages, but he's not your typical W-2 employee. But you can levy bank accounts, you can attach and sell real property, and this isn't someone that's judgment-proof. Donald Trump has significant assets. We've talked about a lot of them in this case. So I think these judgments, at least as far as defendants are concerned, this is a good defendant to have a judgment against. You may actually collect, Andrew.
Okay, what about, I'm not talking now the monetary number. What about some of these properties that were in question? We're looking at one of them right now, Trump Tower there on 5th Avenue. You wouldn't envision or imagine any of these properties being, seized in escrow until these payments are made. Is that a leap too far?
Oh, not at all. Potentially a judgment creditor, which the state of New York now is, could put a lien on the property. They could foreclose upon it, just like anyone else. So Donald Trump is going to have to find a way to stay or pause this judgment while it goes up on appeal. Otherwise, he's going to have to pay interest or work out some sort of deal with the plaintiffs in this case. Otherwise, he may lose his property, just like any other person.
Yeah, and Neama, we're expecting remarks from New York State Attorney General Letitia James. Let's talk about her role in this. Of course, the Trump side has, throughout the duration of this, cast her as a kind of malevolent political actor trying to, bring down the former president any way she can. No doubt, she's going to be taking a victory lap in this press conference starting very soon, right?
Oh, I'm sure she will. This was a tremendous win for her and her office. And, maybe she expected it, but this is a case that's been litigated for quite some time. And it got nasty, both in the traditional and social media. So I fully expect her to say that, justice prevailed and, Donald Trump thinks he's above the law. And this is a lesson to him and anyone else that may choose to flout it.
Neama, you said that there was somewhat of a partial victory for the former president in that the business certificates of his organizations and entities remain, that they were not, kind of voided, so to speak. But nonetheless, he and his sons for, a period of time cannot serve as an officer of a business in New York State. That's very punitive. You have the damages, and then you have that aspect to it. Donald Jr., Eric, Donald Trump, that is their brand. That is their kind of modus operandi. They are businessmen first. That's what they would say. What a blow to them.
It is a big blow. And like you said, Andrew, I think the reason Donald Trump resonates to a lot of people in this country is because he has been such a successful business person. And now, whether it's this case or others, some of that luster may be off now. Again, he's been found to be a fraudster. And, maybe the question is, maybe he's not as successful as people or he claims to be or people think. So I think that's going to hurt. Now, from the bottom line, I think the fact that the licenses are still intact and the companies don't have to be liquidated, that's good, because even though he can't run these businesses, he can still own them. And, maybe Ivanka, who was previously involved, or Melania or another family member can step in and actually run the businesses for these 2 to 3 years while Donald Trump and his son can't.
I want to just kind of keep going until the bottom of the hour with you, Neama, and I want to kind of cite some of these portions from the decision by Justice Engoron. It was 90-plus pages here. We're back out there live to Trump Tower. I want to read this part. This is on page 87, because this, you could argue, Neama, was a key factor in this judgment today. Engoron says this: their complete lack of contrition and remorse borders on pathological. He goes on to say, Donald Trump is not Bernard Madoff, yet defendants are incapable of admitting the error of their ways. Instead, they adopt a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil posture that the evidence belies. I mean, that's a really, really strong portion from the judge there. What did he mean by it?
Well, he's saying, listen, Donald Trump is unwilling to accept any responsibility for his role in all this. And I kind of go back to Jean Carroll, and the reason he got slammed by the second jury was immediately after the first jury renders a verdict, Trump gets out and he defames her again. I think that's part of the problem. If you are a jury, you are a judge who's the finder of fact, you're going to say, well, look, is this someone that accepts responsibility for any of this? Maybe if you took a little bit more of a nuanced approach and said, well, listen, here's some misstatements here, but I think that I can justify these other valuations because of the Trump brand. Trump came out and said, this is all bogus. These documents, not a single one of them are wrong. Not a single one of them are fraudulent. He doubled down on the misstatements. And then you have a CFO who, at least now, if you believe the reports, is going to be prosecuted for perjury. So here's someone who was a key witness in the case, former CFO, who potentially lied on the stand. I mean, the argument will be based on the findings that Trump and his sons also lied during their testimony. So I think that's something that jurors, I think that's something that judges, they consider in deciding what an appropriate judgment it is. And is this a preview of what's going to happen in his criminal cases? I mean, the example I like to give is the classified documents case. I know a lot of people think there's a double standard between Trump and Biden, but if you look at the special counsel's report, one of the key factors is when they were both contacted about having classified documents, Biden cooperated, he returned the documents, but Trump didn't, which required, of course, a subpoena, which he allegedly didn't comply with, and a search warrant. So I think if Trump maybe starts listening to some of his lawyers who want to resolve these matters or not fight everything, he may be better off from a legal perspective.
Neama, I want to just kind of highlight some of the now key instances of fraud that Tish James was alleging was at play here that now has been adjudicated. So this is from page 77. He, being Trump, was aware of having deeded away the right to use Mar-a-Lago as anything other than a social club, and notwithstanding continued to value it as if it could be used as a single-family residence. On page 67, the judge says there can be no mistake that Donald Trump's valuation of Mar-a-Lago from 2011 to 2021 was fraudulent. He goes on to say on page 77, he was aware that 40 Wall Street was operating at a deficit despite proclaiming that it was running a net operating income of $64 million. It goes on to say he repeatedly falsified business records with the intent to defraud. I want to talk about, Neama, intent. That had to be the crucial element here. They had to prove that, right? They had to come to that consideration and determination. Intent was at play. That's how you get people on fraud, right?
Yes. So there's different counts. So the counts that were adjudicated before the trial, they didn't have an intent requirement. So those business records being fraudulent that were decided before, but the conspiracy counts, the insurance fraud count, some of those claims did require proof of intent. And, if you look at the order, Judge Engoron, he says, listen, witnesses may lie, but the documents don't. He's focused on the documents themselves. And like you said, Andrew, there are covenants and easements related to these properties that reduce the value. You can't just use them for anything. Those were ignored. Let's not forget about the square footage that was inflated significantly. Again, these aren't nuanced areas. And I understand that, appraisals and valuations of properties, it's an art, not a science. But there's some actual specific things that were submitted that were just fraudulent, and there were misstatements. And again, I think it was a mistake by Trump and his lawyers not to at least admit to some of that.
Okay, let's just kind of conclude here, because in this very lengthy decision today, the judge essentially said, this is to deter more fraud from going forward. If you're a real estate developer, if you're a burgeoning real estate developer in any big city, are you thinking twice about anything today, especially there in New York City? Are you having your accountants pore over every line item, every detail because of this today? Is this going to set a precedent or an example, or is it a one-off?
I think it does set an example. Obviously, it's a unique case in that it's a former president. But these big fraud trials, they send a message. And I've been doing this for a while, handle fraud cases of federal prosecutor. I can tell you whenever there's an Elizabeth Holmes and a Theranos, or a Sam Bankman-Fried and an FTX, or, Madoff, like the judge says, and now Donald Trump, whenever there's a big fraud like this, folks on Wall Street, folks on Silicon Valley, they pay attention. Again, no one's going to jail here, but this is significant. And if you are an individual and you're submitting documents to a bank, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to make sure everything's accurate before I do so. Otherwise, I might be liable for bank fraud.
Neama, let's just conclude here as well, Neama. This was very complicated. This took a long time, several months, and there was experts and accountants and appraisals and, in insurance. And it was very complicated, to put it mildly. What's the key aspect that viewers should take from this major story? This is a huge political figure. Now another major damage judgment rendered against him in New York City in a matter of just 3 weeks. What should we take away from this story today?
I think the takeaway should be this. This was a huge fine for Donald Trump. And even though it wasn't criminal, we're just talking about civil liability. Yeah. Trump has several criminal trials coming up, one as early as next month in this same city. And this may be the beginning of several losses for the former president.
Yeah, of course, we just got that news yesterday. Trump was in New York City. Kind of hearing this effort to dismiss the Stormy Daniels hush money payment case. The judge there, Judge Juan Merchan, rejecting that. And the trial date is set. Jury selection will begin March the 25th. So I know this is February of 2024, but it really does seem like now we are in the thick of kind of the Trump legal case season, so to speak. Would you agree?
I would agree, Andrew. And this maybe was the undercard of the preseason, but the criminal cases are going to start, and they're going to start soon. And, I think the connection, at least in these two New York cases, is former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. Let's not forget that the investigation in this case related to the civil fraud started when he blew the whistle before the House. And, of course, he's the key player in the Stormy Daniels hush money case and was connected to the payments to former Playmate Karen McDougal. So Judge Engoron said that he was credible. So it's going to be interesting to see what role Michael Cohen plays in that new case as well.
Indeed it is.